My house is a mess. And by all standards, I should be embarrassed to have anyone over, or be showing it to you right now. But a quarter of my house is under construction, and I've got so many projects happening that there's no way I can keep it tidy or clean. So why do I feel so guilty about it? Why does it feel like I'm failing at, I don't know, life? Well, surprising no one, this isn't a new feeling or a new standard. It has its roots deep in our history. But there were three things that happened on either side of the turn into the 20th century that completely changed how we live in our homes. Shifts in our culture that have left us not only with guilt and shame about the state of our residence, but managed to make the task of tidying up nearly impossible. The first has to do with sanitation. This all goes well beyond the idea of cleaning in order to protect health and prevent illness, but it does start there. Cleaning the home has always been an integral part of our existence. It's just that what clean means and how to accomplish it has changed throughout the centuries and regions. In large part because our structures have changed. A dirt floor and a sudsy mop will just get you mud. Our current version really starts up because we went from living spread out, where fresh air and rain can help with a multitude of issues, to cramming thousands of people into cities. Neither clean air nor water were planned for appropriately, and illness understandably became a much larger issue. Adding on that we didn't understand what was causing the vast majority of problems. Some things could be traced back to contaminated water sources eventually, but tuberculosis, for example, thrived in close quarters and was incredibly unpredictable. It took until the end of the 19th century, after countless numbers had fallen to it, to figure out it was mostly transferred by breath and cough, not dirty skirt hems or wearing corsets. It's basically a weird combination of getting things right accidentally, like wearing gloves, but failing on what we now consider obvious, like doctors washing their hands between patients. Since they couldn't control the spread of these illnesses, they aggressively cleaned everything in whatever way they knew how, and attempted to enforce that practice on a society wide scale. And speaking of cleaning things up, the sponsor for today's video is Incogni. Incogni tracks down and removes your personal data from hundreds of websites. In just the last 6 months, they found almost 800 places where my private information has been picked up by data brokers and sold over and over again. Addresses, phone numbers, employers, financial info, even shopping habits have all been handed around. As of now, more than 700 of those have been successfully taken down, and it's averaging 8 days for resolution. And if I come across anything beyond their list of known problems, they have custom removals as well. With their unlimited family and family unlimited plans, you just submit a link where your information is being exposed, and they'll submit a request for you. It's always shocking just how many places even the not chronically online show up in a quick search. I'm definitely not going to be invisible. It's not just about stopping those annoying fake calls, texts, though I have noticed a significant difference in how many scams have come through. It really doesn't take much to piece together enough information to have your identity stolen or accounts opened under your info. I've been diligent over the last few years in clearing my contact information off websites that I can find, but there's just no way to keep up with how fast it spreads. Incogni actually has an estimated time saved ticker on your dashboard, and mine is already over 550 hours. There's no way I could have handled that myself. Everything from your contacts to health, employment, demographics, and even family connections is regularly picked up and sold. So take back your personal data with Incogni. Go to incogni.com/NicoleRudolph and use code NicoleRudolph to get 60% off an annual plan. Obviously, things like infrastructure, running water, electricity, sewage was a priority. No amount of literature was going to get people to change their daily lives when they didn't have access to the basic parts of cleanliness to begin with. For people's bodies, that meant things like public bathhouses to take over until the majority of structures were fitted with plumbing. That didn't work for houses and apartments. So, what they endeavored to do was not only to teach people how to properly clean, but to make it a required practice, no matter how difficult, since they couldn't exactly set up laws, though those would eventually exist in the format of things like child and elder abuse and building safety and sanitation. They used the growing system of moral pressure. Yes, a little bit of etiquette, as I've talked about before, but that's more focused on the middle class, who was already more likely to have plumbing and other resources. It was the working poor that was the true problem by 19th century standards. And while plenty of people did recognize that little progress could be made if the buildings they inhabited and the businesses they worked at were falling apart, convincing the wealthy owners of those structures to spend the money to fix things up was a different story. So rather than creating regulations and laws to that effect, the government decided to focus on the children. With the public school system, it was easy to not only teach children the basics of cleanliness, but to send them home with literature to share. Children are easy to convince of these new standards and how important they are, and theoretically will pass that concern onto their families. It wasn't just simple lessons in school like wash your hands. There were entire books and stories formed around the idea of cleanliness as a moral good. One of the most infamous is that of the water babies, where a perpetually dirty child dies and is stuck in purgatory as a water baby, a caddisfly, until he learns how to be good. Something achieved in large part through realizing why being clean is important. There's other themes running through the book, like anti-child labor and support of the poor, but it comes back to Tom learning that he has to do things he doesn't like because they are the right and good thing to do, like wash. This moral imperative to be clean and tidy spreads much further during the 19th century. It's part of the community and social improvements package. Phrases like cleanliness is next to godliness, and a place for everything and everything in its place are used over and over again. Other terms like purity take on a double meaning of both moral and physical. Keeping yourself clean fed back into not only reducing illness, but uplifting and progressing an advancing society that heavily relied on that feature to define itself. And they weren't subtle about the connection between the two. One newspaper in 1888 wrote, "Is it going too far to say that a man or woman freshly bathed and cleanly clothed is less likely to perpetuate any form of dishonesty than one not so cleansed and so attired? The writer thinks not." It's impossible to navigate literature during this time, whether brief articles in newspapers or magazines or long novels and books, without seeing this theme pop up in various ways. To be good, you had to be clean. Another article from 1851 in the New England Farmer, called The Humanizing Influence of Cleanliness, refers specifically to how this applies to the home. A neat, clean, fresh-aired, sweet, cheerful, well-arranged, and well-situated house exercises a moral as well as a physical influence over its inmates, and makes the members of a family peaceful and considerate of the feelings and happiness of each other. On the contrary, a filthy, squalid, noxious dwelling, rendered still more wretched by its noisome sight, contributes to make its unfortunate inhabitants selfish, sensual, reckless, and brutal. Today we understand, or at least we should, how poverty feeds into all sorts of extended problems, because the focus of life has to be on basic survival. It's hard to learn when you're hungry. It's hard to be peaceful with no way to improve what is not. The 19th century found it far easier to attribute this to the choices of the working class than the framework that kept them that way. They associated what they considered to be lesser things with being unclean, not just poverty, but race and sexuality, certain cultures, especially immigrants, drugs and alcohol, but only certain types, and whatever else was considered the problem of the day. darker skin tones associated with dirt, naturally curly hair with a lack of tidiness, foods that are deemed unhealthy regardless of nutritional content because they aren't familiar, the stigma of the AIDS crisis, and so many other recent illnesses that have been associated with certain groups or cultures and therefore defined as dirty or being caused by being dirty. The lack of cleanliness, they believed, made them impure in more than one way, or rather, their lack of cleanliness in a very specific way. As technology and fashion changed, the household must keep up. Falling behind due to money, culture, or even sentimentality held the advancement of all society back, something they were deeply concerned about at the time, sort of creating a new class system based on how forward a society was and where people fit into it on that scale, how educated you are in standard education, for example. Those who embraced the modern ideals and lifestyle of specific nations, usually the ones colonizing other areas, set the standards as they wished and measured everyone else against them, despite often not measuring up to the standards of other cultures they deemed barbaric or backwards. In their minds, everyone should wholeheartedly embrace the forward movement of modernization, which leads us to the second major change in our guilt-stricken homes: clutter. Now, the idea of spring cleaning is far from new. Even the phrase stretches back at least a couple of centuries, though spring clearing and spring cleaning both seem to be popular. The war against clutter is very much a constant one, but it really ramps up near the end of the 19th century, as styles were beginning to shift away from a mix of collected decor that signaled knowledge and taste towards a new idea of modern. The old wasn't just going out of style, it was gaining a reputation for being downright dangerous. When it comes to the term clutter, the descriptions of said overabundance of items of decor tended to focus on examples of nonsense collections or a compulsion to bring home any item of current trend. An 1878 article about Mrs. Clutter's house, notably the examples of who clutters the home seems to almost always be women, lists her extensive decor of painted candles, horsehair curtains, Moorish rugs, and teacups. Usually, this era celebrates having extensive knowledge of art and international goods, but this time, quote, "the art that Mrs. Clutter is prostrate before dwarfs the imagination, narrows the intellect, and impoverishes the whole nature," claiming she has more care and interest in things than people. Definitely not the way to advance society. In fact, as home trends moved towards a cleaner, simpler appearance, the justification of minimalism in the name of cleanliness only grew. We saw this when I talked about why we painted the woodwork white, really ramping up in the early 1900s as the idea that white woodwork was somehow cleaner or easier to clean, or would resist the dirt more. Whatever it was all advertising. This article from 1902, though, sums it up well, discussing how college students, mostly women, have a tendency to start their time with frills and knickknacks, or what they referred to as a superfluity of naughtiness, another term that has gained double meaning coming from the word naught, or nothing, and implying these students have a great deal of worthless things. After a few years, they banished the silly decorations and embellishments, something the article claims was also happening in general decor as the styles changed from stuffed birds and embroideries of "God bless our home" to Japanese ginger jars and palms, then moving on to even simpler things. The proclivity towards articles on how to banish clutter over the next couple of decades support this theme of growing simplicity. Clutter became the buzzword of the era. This 1913 article has extensive writing on how too many things in a room, regardless of their quality, overstimulates the author. And I do mean extensive and verbose. One could say an article cluttered with words. He concludes that most possessions should be tucked away in closed cupboards and nothing should be constantly in sight, even one's wife or one's husband. Clutter of things, he claims, frets, worries, hinders, and tires us. More and more, any non-functional decor was becoming the villain of the home. Clutter was even claimed to make the house feel hotter. The language bears evidence of this great battle they thought they were waging. Clutter is too dear to the hearts of 9 women out of 10 to hope for its radical elimination for 1 or 2 generations to come. But a crusade against it may lead to the granting of a clear patch for the plain man of the house, who now, in many homes, picks his way through the labyrinth of his lares and penates, basically his household stuff. While I can't say this crusade has been fully successful in the real world, it definitely has panned out in how we present the ideal home, devoid of anything that makes the space busy with unintentional items. Basically a set rather than a living space, something we actively make fun of things like Architectural Digest for, because you're never going to see a paper towel roll in one of those kitchens. Unless you think that perhaps the seriousness of hygiene from our first topic, which would cause the downfall of society, would be softened here because it's just clutter. I present this article from 1913, which popped up in numerous newspapers that year. Instead of blaming civilization, we ought to change it. It really rests with each woman to simplify her method of living, the atmosphere of her home to such an extent that she and everyone else who lives in the house she manages will forget that civilization is a burden. They even suggest having a destruction day to clear things out to achieve that. It's a very lofty goal to somehow make the home so spotless and tidy that everyone forgets all of their problems. Guess I should go sort paperwork on my desk to deal with all this stress of war? The one stress it might actually deal with, however, was cleaning, or rather, modern cleaning. The 20th century didn't necessarily focus on new standards of what cleanliness is, but new ways of achieving it. One part in the form of technology, the other in the form of the housewife. A number of those early articles railing against clutter mention just how difficult it is to dust and clean around for servants. That too many fragile items on the shelves and furniture create immense stress and take up their busy day, which to us, in a time where only the most wealthy have servants, and only some of the middle class pays for an occasional cleaning service to pop by, would imply that these articles were for the wealthy who could afford all the stuff and the help. But the reality is that servants, whether live-in or just by the day, were incredibly common even at the start of the 20th century. As of 1900, over 1.5 million Americans reported being employed as domestic servants, cooks, maids, home nurses, and launderers. Just counting the ones employed in private homes was around 1 for every 100 households. And that's based on who reported it to the census. A lot didn't. This large number was in good part because not only was a household nearly impossible to manage as one person beyond a small apartment size, but because it was still so incredibly cheap. Side note, did you know that when we established minimum wage in 1933, it excluded domestic labor? And it still does, largely because that housekeeping help was seen as both obligatory in being able to keep a household functioning and because it was mostly women of color doing the work. Around half of all domestic servants as of 1940 were black. Inventions like vacuums, washing machines, central heating, and water heaters all reduced the amount of effort that daily cleaning took. It was done not just with the intention of saving you time, but with making it possible for families to function without servants. Something that, despite wages being unrestricted, was still growing financially impractical in many areas. There's only so long a population is willing to stay in an area that doesn't want them and a job that pays them below living wage. Shocking. Add on the cost of building homes large enough to provide room and board to live in servants who aren't allowed to live near you otherwise, and the situation was just untenable. In the 1930s and 40s, newspapers unironically used the phrase, be your own maid, to sell work dresses, aprons, and cleaning tips. So while we think of all of that new technology of the home saving time, it was actually saving someone else's time before it moved over to the housewife's schedule. In some ways, this increased the social pressure to keep a home clean and tidy. With all of the mechanical help, there was no excuse. The social importance of a presentable home didn't dissipate, regardless of external help. The standards never changed. Our surfaces became more cleanable, supposedly, because let's be honest, after the carpet video, I don't trust any ad about easy cleaning. A 5-step process to clean up spaghetti is not on my list of easy. But home layouts changed around and the separation of public and private areas faded. No more did the middle class family have a parlor or even separate living room just for entertaining guests, avoiding the daily disturbances and maintenance. And it wasn't just a problem for the cities or suburbs. Even a 1923 report noted that more farmhouses were spending the time to beautify their front yards because highways were cutting through and making them visible to travelers. There was immense social pressure to keep up appearances to the level that had been set and enforced for decades prior. It's just that it wasn't enforced quite so universally or without any exceptions, something we seem to forget. The key for today is not just knowing where that concept of a tidy home and the morality surrounding it came from, but knowing that the homes and those doing the work were dramatically different back then. And while all the inventions around our house would have us believe we have it so much easier today, it's not necessarily the case, at least not universally. Sure, the vacuum is great, but it matters far more now that our floors are carpeted. With open concept houses, we have a lot more dust and kitchen grease circulating around and sticking to surfaces, so it's a good thing that we have better cleaning chemistry. Modern HVAC reduces the soot, smoke, and oil, but we also open our windows far less to air out all the odors, so instead we perfume in everything. All the modern devices the average person could afford won't make up for the rising cost of living, meaning that fewer and fewer households can survive without multiple working adults, sometimes having multiple jobs. A dishwasher can't cancel out the loss of 40 hours a week, not even including travel time there. Mess happens, and we don't have the time to clean it all up. I mean, joy itself often manifests in clutter toys, food, books, and projects scattered about. As much as I don't like having all of this stuff floating around my home, as someone who does get overstimulated easily, it's a sign that I'm busy. It's a sign that I'm accomplishing big things that take more than a moment, that I'm pretty much working 7 jobs right now. And I know that my piles of costumes or stacks of books to sort aren't causing the downfall of society. I'm not hindering the progress of anyone. Honestly, cleaning it up would definitely be hindering my progress right now. And anyone that judges me for it is either fortunate enough to have the time, and therefore money, to manage it, or it lives a very boring life. We shouldn't hold ourselves or others to outdated standards. Otherwise, I also get to judge them for their lack of taxidermy bird displays and dried funeral wreaths. Absolutely uncultured. With all that being said, I still do feel like I need to actually decorate and clean this room because we moved the light into here and it is height-wise. So I need to rearrange so I don't clock myself one of these days while wearing heels. Very practical reasons to change clutter. They exist. It just doesn't say anything about me morally as a person. I'm not a bad person because I have a pile of unopened mail or a number of glasses that I need to take down to the basement to hand wash because right now I don't have a dishwasher or a kitchen. I'm allowed to have a mess. I'm allowed to have clutter. I like stuff. It's all useful to me because it brings me joy. I do actually really wonder what that like 1900 19 teens period that was really obsessed with clutter and decluttering and all of that. I wonder what they would have thought of someone like Marie Kondo, where it's just not against what they want, but also a completely different mindset. Like they're like, get rid of anything you don't use, anything that is non-functional, anything that is not serving a purpose, which is very minimalism, which is also very much speaking to stuff is cheap enough or I have enough money that I can just go buy more of it if I throw it out, which is a whole ethics issue right there. But more so that she's sitting there going, if it brings you joy, which is like the opposite of what they are trying to encourage, but also it's still decluttering. Marie Kondo makes exceptions for functional things, but she says, on top of that, keep the things that bring you joy and display them. If they're put away in a cabinet, why do you have it? What do you think the Victorians would have done with Marie Kondo? Anything on HGTV, or I'm so, like genuinely had not thought about this before, and now I'm curious what everyone's thoughts are. What do you think the Victorians would think about HGTV and all of that mess? I feel like this is something to hand over to Abby. I don't know.